This is a production of Cornell University.
The world of scholarship is changing rapidly, and increasing demands on scholars require new approaches. In a Chats in the Stacks book talk, Cornell University Library and Information Technology professionals Jon Corson-Rikert, Brian Lowe, and Dean Krafft discuss the new book, VIVO, A Semantic Approach to Scholarly Networking and Discovery. The book provides an introduction to VIVO, which is a tool for enabling the efficient discovery of information about research and researchers, their scholarly works, research interests, and organizational relationships. Begun as a project at Cornell and further developed by the NIH-funded consortium, VIVO is now being established as an open-source project with community participation from around the world.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Brian Lowe, and I've been working on this VIVO project, as she said, for a little over 7 years now. But of course, Jon started this back in 2003, so we've been at it for a while. But I don't think any of us who were active on VIVO in the earlier days could have imagined that we'd be sitting here having produced this weighty tome that's climbing up the bestseller list. I think it was 1,193,789 ranked on Amazon this afternoon. So we're planning to live off the royalties from that. But I did want to mention that this really represents a lot more than just the three of us who happen to be speaking here today. There's 31 authors on this book from 6 different institutions, and that's really the remarkable piece of this, that this has really grown much, expanded far beyond Cornell. It represents the work of a lot of very different talented people, and there's lots of authors at other institutions and additional ones at Cornell besides those of us who will be talking today. So how do we get to this point where we've created this big collaboration? Well, going back to 2003, when Jon started the whole thing, the library saw a role to provide a slightly different kind of service. This is a somewhat early screenshot of VIVO, not going back all the way to 2003, but from the earlier years, where you can see in the title banner, it says VIVO Virtual Life Sciences Library. And so the library at the time saw that life sciences especially, but science in general, were evolving to be much more interdisciplinary. And that the kind of web presences that were out there, especially in Cornell at the time, didn't necessarily make that very obvious. It was a little bit difficult to discover what kinds of research were crossing different hierarchical boundaries just by going and looking around on the web and ending up at particular department websites or college sites. That it was easy to sort of see the hierarchical and institutional boundaries within Cornell, but there wasn't such a good effort being made out there to really show what people were doing across those lines to do kinds of new interdisciplinary research. And so the library, as a sort of independent agent not affiliated with any particular discipline or department, saw a role to step in here and really show what kind of interdisciplinary work is happening at Cornell, but also promote that and encourage that, catalyze that in the future by making it easier to discover who's doing what across the campus. And so over the years, that expanded beyond just being life sciences. With the support of the provost's office, it went to really showcasing all kinds of research and scholarship across Cornell. And so this vivo.cornell.edu is the main site here at Cornell that we talk about when we talk about VIVO. And here's a modern screenshot of one page of VIVO. And really, VIVO from the beginning has been primarily about people. So instead of being this virtual library just about documents and books and traditional kinds of things that the library might be interested in, VIVO really sees people as being the important connecting point that brings everything together. And so a lot of what you see when you look around the vivo.cornell.edu site is profile pages about people. But it's more than just that, because it's more than just having a bunch of text describing what people are doing. What VIVO really has tried to do from the beginning is emphasize the relationships. So the software is engineered from the ground up to really make connections between people and not just sort of present you with a big list of things that you might see on someone's CV, but really try to draw you in and allow you to explore around and link between what's happening across the university. And so we were interested in, obviously publications and grants and kind of the bread and butter of what people talk about in their academic achievements. But in doing that, we are also interested in VIVO in representing the kinds of roles that people are playing. We've got member roles and teacher roles and co-PI relationships and even looking at things like seeing who's been featured in the same news release to sort of show that, find evidence of people working together on common projects. And so it's not always easy to get the data about exactly how people are working together and what kinds of endeavors they're collaboratively involved in. But that's what really VIVO has always strived to do, is to try to get that collaborative sense of these connections between people and represent that in this website. So moving along to 2009, we heard one day from some colleagues at the University of Florida who had we'd already been working with to install VIVO and get it up and running for Florida. They found this interesting call for proposals from the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, that they said, hey, look at this. This sounds an awful lot like VIVO. And so they had put out this call for applications for systems that would connect people and resources to facilitate national discovery of individuals as well as scientific resources, and to encourage interdisciplinary collaboration. And one of the interesting aspects of the way that these awards were funded, this is part of the era of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And so for one thing, it was a one-time award. It wasn't a plan to have continuing ongoing support for infrastructure, but it was also split into these two pieces. So Harvard ended up doing the side that was about research resources, about all the stuff that people produce. But there was this separate call for a project to work on the people and the collaboration, the discovering of individuals and scientists, to encourage this interdisciplinary collaboration and to put together the right kind of teams to approach different scientific problems and both sort of speed up the pace of scientific advancement and also produce better science. And so we, in order to, there's a little bit of money that they were willing to spend. There's this $7.5 million total cost per year kind of ballpark that they were looking at. So it was clear that this was kind of a big deal. So in order to respond to this, we put together this multi-institutional collaboration with a number of different institutions across the country and submitted a proposal to this RFP. And lo and behold, we actually got this thing. We thought it was going to be a little bit of a long shot, considering that we sort of considered ourselves a little bit on the outside of the biomedical world especially. But NIH in doing this really wasn't purely focused on biomedical things. They were obviously interested in that aspect of it, but they also had a broader goal of promoting general scientific collaboration and advancement. And there were also some other elements of what VIVO was proposing that seemed to be pretty responsive and attractive to what they were looking for. And one of those is the fact that VIVO, as a software system that supports this website, is open source. So that means that it's not only free in terms of not having to pay money to go and get it. You can just go and download it for free. But it's also, you have all of the underlying codes. You can modify it and change it for your institution, do different things with it. It's all freely available to you to do what you want with. There aren't restrictions on that. It's about open data. So we proposed using W3C standard technologies to put data out there in non-proprietary formats so that people can use that for what they want. And it was also about local control and having a decentralized structure. And so in one of these things that the NIH was looking for, in not wanting to have this big monolithic, they didn't want to build a big system that was going to require a lot of ongoing federal funding to maintain. They wanted something that was going to be useful to the different players who were putting in their pieces into this system so that they would have an inherent reason to want to maintain it. And so VIVO already was serving a useful purpose at Cornell, and it attracted the attention of institutions like Florida who saw it as a useful thing for their schools as well. So the idea that we would be able to build a national network of VIVOs that would do useful things for each individual institution, but also feed into this broader national network to advance the NIH's goal, seemed like a very sustainable model. And so to talk a little bit more about this idea of linked open data, this is one of the basic building blocks of what we do in VIVO. So VIVO is a semantic web application, and I won't talk in great detail about what that means, but one of the aspects of it is that if we look here, this is a page from the University of Florida's VIVO system. This is Mike Conlon, who is the PI. Florida was the lead institution on the broader NIH grant. And so this is a page that represents Mike Conlon. And there's a URL up in the address bar here in Firefox. And the little subtle wrinkle here is that that same URL that represents Mike Conlin that you can put into your Firefox address bar and have it bring up this web page that you can see and read just like any other, that same URL is also a unique identifier that's used in the data. So it means that all you have to do, and you can actually do this in Firefox if you know how to tweak the settings, all you have to do is flip a little switch and you can go to that same URL and get back this structured data, that software that machines understand, and you can get it back from the exact same spot. So it means that all of the stuff that you can sit there and read as a human being looking at this page is also out there and exposed and available for software to come along and grab. So the way that Google indexes web pages by going around with their Google bot and following links and scraping text off the page and building a search index, we're going a step beyond that, providing them with a whole structured set of data so that if you have a robot that's looking at this semantic data, it can go around and actually traverse these links between things and get the raw data instead of having to grab it off the screen. And so that's sort of the basic idea of the semantic web, that we have data broken down into these simple little bits, and so sometimes they're referred to as triples, but you can also think of them as simple little links. So if somebody has, if you want to link a person to a position that they have in a department, you can break down that chain into a bunch of little simple relationships that are sort of like hyperlinks that you would find on a web page. But in the semantic web, we then specify exactly why these things are linked together. And the piece behind that explains the meaning of those links, the semantics of those links, is something called an ontology. So that explains exactly why these things are all related together. And one of the things about an ontology is that it's built on a logical language that you can make deductions from. So you can have special bits of software called reasoners that go through, and if you link things together initially, a reasoner can go through and make other links. So for example, if we decide that we've got something in a Cornell VIVO describing a person who's engaged in a broader collaborative project, and then there's another page on a VIVO at Florida describing the exact same person, we can say, this person really is the same as this person, and anything that Cornell has linked to this person, any data that they've asserted about this person, then a reasoner can go along and say, okay, well, we know that that's also true about this other one. And so when people go through and in this decentralized fashion start to build up these different sets of data, it's very useful to be able to go through and automatically process that and make sure that you're not missing out on connections that could be there but just didn't happen to get linked initially. So we can have software come through and help fill out those links. And another aspect of the ontology is that this data model for what we're talking about is designed to be flexible and extensible. So we're not just sort of preordaining exactly what kind of relationships we can talk about. You can go through at your institution or wherever you're deploying VIVO and build out additional data. You can talk about different things that we haven't thought about yet. And it's really designed to do that in a way so that if you want to talk about greater detail that makes sense for your own purposes, that might not be necessarily readily understandable to people from other institutions, that can sort of roll up and be expressed at a more general level for consumption elsewhere. And, yeah.
When you use the word data, are you meaning the data in a study, or are you meaning data like the number of publications somebody has, or both?
It could be sort of any of those things, but actually what I mean primarily by data is, if we go back here a couple of slides, so this diagram of these kinds of relationships that people have to one another, that's all data. That's sort of the primary data within VIVO. And so you can obviously extend that. You could talk about things related to a particular study or other kinds of derived counts of things, and that would all be data too. But this is kind of the bread and butter of what we typically deal with in VIVO. And so, so this also kind of speaks to that point. So one of the ideas with VIVO is that we're trying to explicitly stay out of the business of trying to describe particular things for particular research disciplines or particular scientific domains, that's something, we leave that to domain experts, and we can bring in the kind of work that they've done. So if you have a taxonomy of things that are relevant to your particular field of study, other ontologies that may be out there, we can bring that in, we can link to that, we can incorporate that into data that we have in VIVO, but we're not trying to replicate that kind of effort. So what we're really trying to do is talk about the way that people and organizations and the actual, the more the process of doing research and what comes out of doing that research, and not the actual content of the research itself. We tap into other things for that. And so just to continue this idea of the extensibility of what we're talking about, that here's an example of a VIVO system at Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics at University of Colorado Boulder. And they also have a VIVO that's very similar to VIVO at Cornell that's very focused on people. But here they've gone a step further and they've extended that with particular data about different equipment that they've used in experiments and other things that they've done. And they can link that all together using this linked structure within the semantic web data. And that makes it very easy for them to go and write these kinds of queries that can answer different kinds of questions that they might not have been able to easily do otherwise. So for example, they can find the people that have written articles that have been supported by particular instruments that they've got in their lab, and being able to track the use of the stuff that you've invested a lot of money in, and figure out what kind of new discoveries and new things that equipment has led to is a pretty powerful thing. And so you can link all of that together using this very flexible semantic structure. Another related effort for extending VIVO is this thing called EuroChris, this current research information systems effort that's been going on for over a decade in Europe. They've got a data model that is a recommendation to EU member states to be used when you are describing research information. And traditionally, it's been used more for administrative purposes, for kind of tracking the investment in things and what kind of work has been done, and not so much for purposes of discovery of what's going on to promote interdisciplinary collaboration. But that's where they see a strategic partnership with VIVO as being very useful. So we've been working with them on aligning and mapping their data model to what we're doing in VIVO, so that we can link all of their data in and have a more seamless semantic network across the Atlantic between what's happening here and over there, and be able to repurpose some of the CHRIS data for more discovery purposes. There's another related effort called KSRA, which is the Consortia Advancing Standards in Research Administration Information, that is all about trying to make sort of vendor-neutral standards for describing research information that can be adopted by multiple different software systems to make them more interoperable, so that people who are ostensibly supposed to be doing research can spend more of their time actually doing that research and not having to transfer data and cut and paste and do reports and things between different systems that in theory should be talking to each other already. So they're trying to make them talk together. But they're also interested in a lot bigger issues. They had a conference last fall that we participated in that was all about academic impact and being able to assess the impact of research. And so, so they're actively involved in all kinds of interesting areas. And just to leave off here quick, a couple quotes that we became aware of. VIVO getting the attention of some interesting people. Jim Hendler is kind of one of the founders of the semantic web. He's a well-known artificial intelligence researcher and a professor at RPI. And here's a quote that we found from a workshop he was involved in about the future of scientific discovery in open networked environments. And he was calling out VIVO as an example of something that is an interesting project in this decentralized sense, where we have each library maintaining its own holdings, this library of people in addition to a library of things that then can be integrated for the purpose of sharing this data. And again, he's emphasizing the fact that this idea of the library of people, not just the resources at the university, but the individuals and what they're doing and how they're working together, is a very powerful and interesting idea. And so we're seeing more and more institutions wanting to buy into that powerful idea and become part of a broader network. And that leads us to Jon talking more about that at Cornell.
Thank you, Brian. So we certainly feel that VIVO resonates well with the One Cornell theme, and would like to talk a little bit about that. Find my buttons here. We encompass all colleges, all campuses, including Weill. We haven't done a lot with Qatar yet, but we have the Geneva campus and Weill, and a little bit about Cornell and Washington, all disciplines, and we're really interested in getting all researchers, including we're hoping to be able to expand to graduate students, particularly in the coming year, because that's an area that has been of interest to our faculty and also of strong interest to the graduate students themselves who would like to be able to market themselves and have a Cornell homepage for themselves that was linked with all the researchers they've in fact collaborated with. We are also trying to provide, as Brian suggested earlier, consistency in the data and also context around the data, because that's one of the things that's hardest to find. You can find anything in Google, but you find it kind of randomly and in isolation. And you can, if you work hard, you can build that context yourself. But if we can help with that, I think that's a positive contribution. So my section of the talk, I'll be talking a little bit about some of the implementation challenges and some of the policy questions we're dealing with. It seems like a very simple idea. If I'd known where this was going, it would have been one thing, but also if I'd known some of the challenges involved, I might not have started. But it seems like a simple idea to take all the basic public information about researchers as kind of a no-brainer and make it easy to find for academic purposes. What's this, what's so special about that? Well, why is this hard? Well, we need to bring the data together. That means we have to tap into Cornell's many systems of record, each of which has an independent and long history, pretty much as a silo, where each one, there hasn't even until quite recently been agreement about what the organizations at Cornell, not even a common organizational identifier. And we have then other reporting systems. There happens to be a large adoption of Activity Insight at Cornell by several colleges. It's a tool for faculty reporting that's used, partly for annual reviews and partly to track certain trends in what's happening within colleges. We pull data from publishers and some national databases, and then we have direct editing. So we have a number of sources. So blending all those together is the challenge, and we really see VIVO as the antithesis of a silo, that it's really intended to, in advance, it's a little bit like the Amazon thing that people who bought this also read that. It's sort of bring out in front of you the connections which you might discover if you were really observant, but which if you bring them out in front and point them out to people, they're more likely to recognize them. So obviously we have, if you're searching for, come to Cornell and see what does Cornell do with cardiology, unless you happen to know that we have a medical school in New York City. I talk to people all the time that have no idea that the two institutions have anything to do with each other. There are other, particularly with Weill as the name frequently for Weill Cornell, there also are people who think that the medical campus is here in Ithaca, or the Ithaca campus is in New York City. I think there have even been students who show up in New York City to enroll in Cornell and find out that the campus is actually 4 hours away. So there's actually a parallel effort. We initially added Weill Cornell people to VIVO here, but with the NIH grant, the Weill Cornell campus undertook its own VIVO, and it's become a very nice connector between the two campuses. And we want to provide new insights into collaboration. This is a visualization that the team at Indiana University under Kati Borner developed that essentially shows you quickly in a single glance. This person has obviously some stronger collaborations, and then you can see even the subtler gray lines connecting the people. So that's a little work group there. So you've got a little understanding of a cluster of where activity is happening. And here's another person who happens to have more co-authors, but so you can again see even fairly complex patterns of, and you can also navigate to any one of those other authors if you want to see what in fact that person she wrote, that large number of articles with. What did that person do? What was the nature of the collaboration? You can quickly discover that. Another mantra we try to use is the enter data once and use it many times. It's very expensive to gather and maintain data. So if we, here's a little VIVO page and a professor in chemistry, but then they consume that same data on their website. when they build the chemistry department website, they can concentrate on the high-level things about their major research programs or degree programs or the things, seminars or whatever, and then their faculty data, instead of having to ask their faculty to maintain another profile, they pull it in from VIVO. So that model, we think, is one that's quite extensible. Cornell Cooperative Extension has been using VIVO recently to connect researchers at Cornell with the extension educators who are discipline specialists in over 60 offices around the state. And this provides a path from Cornell to the community and also as a path for feedback to come in. That's this very strong extension history at Cornell that this is a new opportunity for them to raise visibility and also for people who search, VIVO comes up in Google searches about Cornell counties. And if you then find the Cornell Cooperative Extension office and a connection to a work group on 4-H or youth engagement or urban horticulture or whatever those are more visible. So we have actual entries in VIVO for the Cornell Cooperative Extension associations with a nice colorful picture of their webpage and an indication of where they are in the state and then their program areas. There's mixtures of faculty and extension people that are all blended together. So the patterns of actual interaction at a very low level are visible primarily through search, which is how most people use the web these days. This is another derivative product of VIVO where we feed the CALS Research and Impact portal. Partly this is data that comes to us from Activity Insight, this annual reporting thing. So all CALS faculty members, I'm sure there are any here are more than aware of the fact that they have to do this report every spring or actually around this time of year. And one of those is to describe a project or one or more projects and describe the impact it has and what the problem it was addressing, and this all gets integrated passed through VIVO to be disambiguated and coordinated and then fed to a site that the CALS Communications Office uses so that they can, when a legislator visits from a particular county, they can print out this and have a nice dossier of Cornell projects relating to exactly what Cornell has done for them lately, which is quite of always of interest for the for Cornell in its activity across the state. And then there's a map component to this, which is quite useful for getting a sense of Cornell's international engagement, and this is just from one college, so it's obviously quite extensive. So some of the policy issues we run into, there's many intriguing issues that VIVO sometimes is a lightning rod for. Who owns the data? Is this my data? Is the fact that I wrote this something, or the fact that I used to work in a field that I no longer is sort of my center, and therefore I might not want that information. There are people who are doing animal studies who are very sensitive about the public, the general public seeing that. So there are many dimensions of privacy. There's often concerns about information being brought together that in isolation is sort of been in a public place before, but has not all been brought together. And suddenly the combination of that is then may reveal something. And there have been some well-publicized articles about that issue recently. And there are then different notions of Cornell's organization structure from an academic and degree program point of view, from an employment unit point of view. Kaltura is a new video sort of streaming site that Cornell's built, and we worked with them to try to understand when they're getting contributions and they want to have a department, the Society for the Humanities or some other would like to have all of the video that people have from their world have contributed to be visible. So, and they have a somewhat different view of what organizations are at Cornell. So it turns out to be a little bit challenging to balance the optimization of one particular process or one particular unit against the common good. But we certainly have had some constructive discussions. Updating is another challenge that every major system of record at Cornell is changing. As of March 21st, we will be getting our paychecks and our benefit statements from Workday, not PeopleSoft. And probably many of you are aware of the major financial system change a year ago when there were some delays in travel reimbursements and things like that. We have, strongly, we knew it from the beginning, but it's been reinforced many times that you need to make changes at the source or else the problem just comes back. So our ultimate goal is to have a mouse over that connects you to the right person. So if you find something in VIVO and say, that's not right, and my title was changed 3 months ago, David Harris, who was one of the early advocates for VIVO in the administration, really wanted us to do a button where it would connect you to your HR representative so you could say, my title, why isn't my title showing up correctly? And another approach would be to feed time-sensitive data in dynamically, which is perhaps an even better approach, because why should we maintain copies of data? And we do that with contact information, for example. So privacy, I think the goal here is to provide individuals better control over what information is made public, and to extend extend what they wish to release as public data, extend control over that using Cornell's namespace. And this means that we have worked closely with the activity insight managers in Cornell colleges so that the review interface that faculty have to say, yes, this is my publication, or yes, this is my grant, but please don't show it, that same information passes through to VIVO so there's not a separate process to review it. So again, from the faculty point of view or researcher point of view, they only want to have to go one place to edit data and not have to keep doing it multiple times or have inconsistency. And one of the theses of the semantic web that we are finding reinforced more and more recently is that the authoritative information on the web will be seen as having higher value. So the fact that if the researcher feels like they have control over it and it's in Cornell's namespace and keeps that identifier on it as it goes out of Cornell, that will be helpful for the institution and helpful for the individual, since data is so often there are something like 85 systems like this in the world, commercial ones, and systems like Mendeley and so forth, and there are a number of systems which operate entirely by scraping web pages. So they'll get anything off the web and assemble it and build you a profile when you have no idea it even exists. So we're looking at reasonable, actionable steps that we can take to build this out. One little mantra is things, not strings. We're trying to get those identifiers so we know what things are. If we're referring to a conference, we ideally would like to have an identifier on it. We want to be sure which journal we're talking about. We're promoting information reuse, and we're trying to provide sustainable added value for Cornell's information investment, which is significant. This is sort of an example of a new area. There's a Memorial University of Newfoundland has just joined kind of the VIVO community, and their big thing that they want to bring and activate, they have a system called YAFO, which they use to connect Memorial University and also University of New Brunswick with people in the provincial government at the local and provincial level, and also entrepreneurs and businesses where they can come and suggest a research idea. This is what I want the university to work on. I'm looking for a partner who's an expert in that, and to actually sort of have an outreach program around this. So the Memorial University is coming into the VIVO community with this agenda of taking their existing platform, moving it onto the VIVO platform, and bringing this new area, which we think is quite exciting. As you begin to think of multiple institutions, you run into challenges where there are different systems and structures and data. You have inconsistencies and somewhat overloaded meanings for terminology. You can't count on any kind of a cookie-cutter replication, and there's also then language issues to deal with in international settings. We've been told recently that the British, Australians, and Americans have relatively similar academic hierarchical structures, but the Europeans, the continental Europeans, have something quite different. We've been dealing with things like Dutch names, where there's the Van der Velden, where Velden is how you want to alphabetize it, and Van der is actually considered a last name prefix, but that's a sort of a different way to have to think about name alphabetizing. Libraries have been doing this kind of thing with book titles for years, so I think we can figure it out, but it is challenging. There are also then benefits across institutions that shared experience amongst our developers and our policy people and outreach people has provided a lot of clarity and new ideas. We've had a particularly nice dialogue going with Duke and Brown and UCLA about humanities. It turns out that Brown has found quite vociferous articulation by their humanities faculty that it isn't just the number of publications that they've done that counts. It's the reuse, the number of times a poem has been anthologized into a work, a number of times a musical composition has been performed by a prestigious orchestra, the times that a book has been translated, the number of languages in which, so there's a kind of different different ways of representing the work of scholars and the impact of the work of scholars that we need to be sensitive to. And also, we're very aware of the fact that research is happening increasingly in teams that span institutions. So there's the whole virtual organization thing that I think Dean will be talking about a little more. And I just want to show briefly, while Cornell, I mentioned earlier, they have an instance. They're building some sort of another kind of tool built on top of VIVO that specifically is a dashboard for their research office and for their dean. That's asking targeted questions. How is the number of publications co-authored with other institutions? Weill Cornell has a number of partners around the country, and it turns out there's quite a different rate of publication collaborations with these different partners. And they have questions about the number of publications and the types of publications over years. So this is taking VIVO data, putting it into another piece of software and visualizing it. So this kind of open architecture where you can move the data from one source. They're interested in, they've got a compliance issue that all universities have a compliance issue with deposits in PubMed Central, that if you have NIH funds, you have to have deposited your publication in an open access repository. So we're very much going after the question of outputs and versus outcomes. It's not enough to just know what was produced. You have to know some of the implications of that, the benefits for economic impact and societal benefit, which are much harder to identify and categorize. And there are many questions about the return on research investment that are begging for consistent comparable data, which is what we hear when we go to Washington and talk to federal agencies, that they're being asked by Congress is asking the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House, which turn around and asks NIH, NSF, DOE for consistent, what's happening? How can we argue, how can President Obama stand up in the State of the Union and argue for increased research expenditures if we can't explain what has been accomplished with what's been spent so far? And increasingly those questions are across domains over time and across institutions. So I just want to briefly cover this search that's been mentioned that we took 7 institutions of the VIVO grant. We added in an outlier, Harvard Profiles, which uses different software but actually produces data now in the same format. They adopted the VIVO format for their profiling system, and we put that into a search index, and we build a site which can also be connected to other providers, and then we develop a little site where you can search, and you can limit your search if you want to courses or equipment or people, or else you can just use it like Google and get some results where we've got on the right a choice that you want to see the person at Florida or Cornell, and do you want a faculty member or some other type of academic, and this is a fairly, again, a fairly simple idea, but the idea that you could do this across a consortium is quite compelling because Google is sort of an unlimited search, and there's some places where you want to have a more constrained search. And then there's a nice little bookmarklet that's been done so you can have in your browser, if you are highlighting some text, it'll pull up the VIVO person from any of these institutions that is the most relevant to the topic or that sentence you've highlighted. So there's some interesting potential for tools there. The multi-institutional scenarios, the multiple campuses of one university is quite common. The university and federal lab connections in Colorado, Boulder is right where there's a National Renewable Energy Lab nearby. There's the National Institute of Standards. There's the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and they're very interested not only tying their own campuses together, but tying themselves with federal labs. There's the 60 Clinical and Translational Science Awards, and big NIH long-term funding awards that have a consortium that has adopted the VIVO standard for exchange of data. And we heard this last week that 13 universities in the Netherlands and the National Library will be building a network of VIVO instances to cover all the major researchers in that country. And we have a project with the UN called AgriVivo, which is bringing together data from a number of smaller research consortia, mostly sort of self-organized small groups around the developing world. So there are many scenarios that we think will continue to evolve as VIVO gains traction. So, and I believe, Dean, it's your turn.
Okay, I think I'm clipped in here. So I'm going to talk a little about the sort of Future VIVO, where we're going, building out the community. You've heard some examples of that already. So I'll talk a little about a new sort of open community home for the VIVO project as it grows well beyond Cornell. I'll talk about some of the meetings that happen regularly about VIVO. VIVO and the sort of broader research informatics infrastructure, where it fits in. Extending the VIVO vitro technology beyond just the researcher profiles, which have been were the focus of the NIH grant and have been the primary focus of VIVO. And then a last slide on some of the challenges that we are facing here. So DuraSpace is a not-for-profit organization that supports the DSpace and Fedora repositories, which some of the library people will be very familiar with. It's going to serve really as the open source community home for future VIVO development. So they have all the legal and financial framework, the tools and so on to support a broad community. So they have also been managing the DSpace and Fedora projects for a number of years now and demonstrated success. We're starting with an initial 2-year governance period based on a set of founding sponsors who we're currently importuning as we sit here, a management team and dedicated development and leadership effort. So the VIVO community really spreads around the world. I hope you can see all those little blue pointers there. Significant in Australia, in Europe, some in South America, a lot in North America. We have a regular annual meeting. We're going to have the 4th annual VIVO Conference coming up this August in St. Louis. For each year, we've had about 200 to 250 people show up with workshops, papers, keynotes, invited talks and posters. It's been an exciting way to exchange information about VIVO. In April, we'll have the 3rd VIVO Implementation Fest, where we bring together institutions that are implementing VIVO and discuss the challenges, help them with implementation issues, and support their institutional implementation. And we just had an Australian VIVO Days get-together with Jim Blake from the team here going to Australia to help support the large Australian VIVO community. There's the beautiful picture. If you want to, we'll have the web page up fairly soon, so you can sign up for VIVO in St. Louis this coming August. So let me talk a little about VIVO as sort of a research informatics infrastructure and reaching somewhat beyond individuals, although we'll start there. So the USDA is adopting VIVO for its intramural research to knit together data from 7 major agencies and fulfilling the reporting requirements for the Office of Science and Technology Policy. The National Center for Atmospheric Research has just agreed that it's going to start piloting a VIVO to coordinate. It has a number of large, multi-year, multi-institutional, multi-instrument research programs. A lot of people spread out around the world, a perfect use for VIVO to help coordinate all that effort and all of the data and pieces that go together to do it. Another part of the sort of research informatics effort is that the accurate structured VIVO data, which you've been hearing about for a while here, can feed external profiling and discovery systems. The ORCID effort is a standard researcher ID effort. A number of publishers are signed onto that. We can potentially take VIVO data at an institution and pre-populate ORCID profiles, allowing people to claim their ORCID IDs. We're looking at other potential external profiling systems like Google Scholar and Academic Analytics, which again can draw on this structured, authoritative VIVO data to build out those profiles. The extensibility of VIVO, which Brian talked about a bit, allows it to represent research resources. That was the Eagle Eye project you heard about, as was one example of that, and tie them to research data sets, to publications, to researchers, promoting data discovery and reuse. One of the real focus areas for government and research is the idea that research data needs to be available for reuse and potentially for replication of scientific experiment. So the Laboratory of Atmospheric and Space Physics at Colorado wants to make their data sets and information publicly available. Right now they have static web pages that do that, but they really want to be able to link together the data sets with the flight equipment, with the particular spacecraft, with the individual instruments, with the publications, with the grants, so they have the full contextual picture of the data set to support discovery. We've had a project here at Cornell that, again, builds on VIVO called DataStar that creates a data set registry for managing data sets and linking them again to researchers, to grants, to publications, and supports discovering citations, linkages, and all the various uses of data. Another effort that's been ongoing is extending the VIVO Ontology. We have a project called CTSA Connect that is working together to tie biomedical research resources again together with the VIVO Ontology to create this broader picture of research resources in a research environment with people and data. And a final use of the VIVO technology is we're leveraging it for our own library discovery and access efforts. So we're building what we're calling an integration layer that pulls together all sorts of information about the information resources of the library, the articles, the journals, the books, all the things that we manage. And we're doing this using the VIVO technology to, again, establish these sort of relationships among things, easily be able to build virtual collections, do annotation, build a network of information resources. So we're leveraging it there. So last, some of the challenges we're facing now. How do we communicate VIVO's goals to faculty, administrators, funders, and other institutions? You saw a lot of uptake. It's kind of interesting because a number of institutions there are people there who just sort of get it and say, wow, I can see how this fits into our needs, our existing systems, and what we want to do in the future. And others, it's much more of a sell. The difference in the disciplines is kind of interesting as well. The biomedical folks actually had, as we've mentioned, existing profiling systems. They already recognized this as a need. And making those kinds of connections across broad biomedical research projects is a clearly good application of VIVO. It's been a little less obvious in some of the other disciplines. Jon's already mentioned the challenge of adapting to constant changes in data sources. I mean, we certainly have this within Cornell, but others face it. How do we keep up with the changes in our data feeds? How do we fully exploit the opportunities provided by VIVO linked data? You've seen some examples of the kinds of visualizations and analyses that have been done, the kinds of multi-institutional search that is possible. How do we build tools to take even further advantage of this? How do we coexist in a world where not everyone uses VIVO? So I mentioned the National Center for Atmospheric Research wants to do these big virtual organization projects across many institutions. Some of the institutions they're working with have existing VIVO data, but some of them they have researchers who are isolated currently. So how do we enable them to be part of this broader linked data network? And finally, how do we position VIVO on a sustainable path, make sure that in the absence of lots of grant funding from the NIH, we can still sustain the development and use of VIVO. And clearly having the broad international community of users, people who are committing significant resources and significant effort themselves to implementing VIVO at their own institutions is a big part of that sustainability effort. So I will stop there and we will take questions.